Welcome to How to Self-Edit Like a Developmental Editor. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this presentation will help you with techniques on how you can edit your own manuscript, your own story, the way a developmental editor would do it. Just a quick introduction. My name is Michelle Rascon. I am the owner of Rascon Revisions. It's an editorial service business for fiction authors. I work with self-publishing and querying authors on full manuscripts and submission packages. Sometimes I do partial manuscripts. I became a volunteer editor for Revise and Resub, which is #RevPit on Twitter in 2019. And this is my first time participating as a presenter for Right Hive, but I've known about it for years and I'm super excited to be here today. Just going to go over what we'll discuss. We're discussing techniques for how to edit your own work the way a developmental editor would, like I said. Learn what to look for, how to organize, and how to tackle the big edits of your next novel. So today I'm going to talk about just briefly what is a developmental edit, because some authors are not quite sure what that entails, what the process looks like for the editor, and then we'll get into what the self-editing process will look like for the author, how to organize that self-edit, a little bit of resources, and then we'll go through some questions, and I will be in the Discord answering questions as this presentation is going. First off, what is a developmental edit? The definition is an in-depth review of an author's manuscript that focuses on the big picture elements of their story. Those elements include character arcs, plot structure, pacing, world building, and much more. It really depends on the editor, and it depends on what the author needs, and it depends on what the author needs for that manuscript. Usually the focus is on the strengths and the opportunities that are presented within that manuscript and the author's writing in general, the recommended revisions from the editor, and the next steps that the editor recommends the author take to make their story even better. Each developmental edit should include at least an editorial letter from the editor. And that's pretty much what we're going to discuss today, is how to create your own letter without an editor. So an author is ready for a developmental edit after extensive self-editing. So usually the process goes something like this. You are probably going to have way more drafts than this, but I just wanted to limit it a little bit. So draft 0 is what I call it. It's getting the words out on the paper. You're not thinking about anything. You're just thinking about the story that's in your head, the characters that are in your head, and you're trying to get them out there. The next draft, usually go read through it, and all those little brackets that you put in, like make sure you fill in this scene here, and decide the color of their hair and their eyes and all that kind of stuff. You fill in all those things in the next draft. And the draft that we're going to discuss is when you have your final draft and you're ready to revise it for the character arcs, the plot, the structure, the pacing, and the world building. So this is what the process looks like for a developmental editor. Each editor is different. This is just to give you an idea of how the dev edit might work. This is basically how I do it as well. So the first step is the intake. And the intake is when the author contacts the editor and the editor is like, cool, tell me your story, tell me the genre, tell me the age category, what's the word count, what's your concept, what are you concerned about, why do you need this developmental edit? The next step would be the editor reading the manuscript, taking notes on that manuscript. And sometimes the editor gives the authors those notes, sometimes they don't. It depends on the editor. Then there's a thinking phase, is what I call it. And I usually need at least a few days to let the story sink in, to think about the things that the author really excels at and the things that could help the story be better. And when you're thinking about that, sometimes you jump right into the editing phase, which is the outline. So I outlined the edit letter. I know there's going to be some pantsers And I know there's also a panel about that. So I'm going to check that one out. I'm really interested in the discussions that'll happen there. But anyway, if you create an outline, it could be super helpful during that thinking phase. And then you want to focus on the opportunities and the strengths. The opportunities are just like anything that needs help, anything that would make the manuscript better, anything that you're not sure about. The strengths would be what's going well in it. You know, what are you really proud of? In this case, it would be what does the editor think is going really well in it? What does the editor think could be improved? The delivery stage is where the editor just reviews the edit letter, revises it, proofreads it, and sends it off to the author. So we're going to talk about how you can do that for your manuscript. So your situation is going to be just a little bit different. For the intake, what you're going to do is talk about, maybe not talk about, you're probably going to want to write down your goals for this manuscript. Ask yourself some questions. What do you want to become of this manuscript? Are you writing it for yourself? Are you writing it to publish traditionally? Are you going to self-publish? What do you want to do with it once it's done? Who is the intended audience? What age group is going to be reading this book? If it's middle grade or YA, if it's adult, that's a really big age group. What's the genre? You might also want to think about what those tropes are for that genre and write that down so that when you're going through it, you can make sure that you're really nailing those tropes. Think about what your story's concept is. What are you trying to tell with this story? What are your themes? And then finally, what are your major concerns for this story? And this is without even looking at the manuscript. This is just you thinking about what you need to do next with your story. Use an outline if you have one. We're moving on to the writing section. If you don't have one, maybe consider creating one as you're reading your manuscript so that you can identify your plot holes. And then make some notes on your current opportunities and your current strengths. Again, this is without even touching the manuscript yet. This is like you thinking pre even looking at it. When we get to the sections, this will make a lot more sense, but make sure when we get to these sections that you're focusing on your opportunities and your strengths. Don't forget about looking at what you do really well, because I guarantee you there's a lot that you do really well and you're going to want to focus on all the things that you have to fix. But it's really important to remember the things that you do well too. Getting to the editing phase is basically reading your manuscript. I'm going to go through some options on how you can tackle these sections, but you're going to read your manuscript. You're going to make notes as you go through each section. And then I recommend taking some time away to think, even if it's just for the night. A lot of times when authors are trying to self-edit their own work, they want to fix everything right when they read it. They read something, they're like, oh no, I got to fix that. And then they go into a rabbit hole and you end up fixing like 20 different things and you forget the original thing you were going to fix. So I recommend writing it all out first, take a break, and then go back and try to solve it. When you're done, when you're ready to tackle it, you might need to take a really long break, who knows? But when you're ready to tackle it, all you're going to do is go through your notes and start revising. Now, this is the fun part. This is probably what everybody wants to know, how to organize those notes. We're going to talk about the beginning of your manuscript's character development, the plot, the scene development, pacing, world building, and the ending, and then some options on how to organize it all. And I'm going to talk about what's expected in each of these sections. So when you get to the beginning of your manuscript, this is the hook. This is what you want to make sure shines. Most authors are pretty good at this because most authors are querying and they're trying to get published traditionally. So they want to make sure that the beginning really hooks the agent. If you're self-publishing, most authors use Amazon. So there's that little section on Amazon that read the beginning of this story. So again, you want to make sure you're really hooking the reader. When you read the beginning of your story, these are the questions that you should ask yourself. Does it hook the reader? The way that you hook the reader is by connecting them to the main characters. Do that by showing the reader the main character's current life before everything changes, which is the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event that changes everything for the main characters, and it occurs within the first 20% of the story. Or it should. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the path that you're following with your manuscript. But that's the expectation for most books these days. So that's the beginning. When you're going through the beginning of your manuscript, write down all the things that you're doing well for the beginning. Yes, I hooked my reader. No, I didn't. I need to let them know what happened before the inciting incident. It comes too soon. I made it on the first page. Maybe I need to start a scene earlier. Or the inciting incident doesn't happen until like page 25. Maybe I need to make that happen sooner. Those are the kinds of things that you want to look for when you're creating your own edit letter. The next one is the character development. This is the character arc, and these are the questions that you should be asking about the character arc. This is going to be through the whole manuscript, not just the beginning. Does your main character transform from who they were at the beginning to who they are at the end? Or does your main character transform the world? I'll use mystery because it's a pretty easy example for me to use. I don't know why, but it is. Anyway, so your main character, apart from solving the mystery, they're probably going to start out as one person. And then through this investigation, through this discovery, they're going to end up as a different person. So that's one way they can change themselves. How they transform the world is hopefully they figured out, who the killer is, if that's the mystery. The next part is, does your main character have realistic flaws and redeeming qualities that help readers relate to and root for them? So something that I would like to make clear is that you can have unlikable main characters. That's totally fine. The issue is they have to have redeeming qualities that help the readers root for them and want them to win, even though there are things about them that are unlikable. Realistic flaws is probably best described as something that readers can relate to. Some people think that insecurity is a flaw, but a lot of people can relate to insecurity. So that would be one example of that. The next part is, do your characters have distinct voices, values, goals, and motivations? So a distinct voice just means, are they their own person, or does every character sound the same? Is the main character different from their sidekick or their villain? Are their values different? Even if some people have the same values, we all kind of have different values within those values. I hope that makes sense. Everyone is different, is what I'm trying to say. And that's what you need to model your characters after. No one person is the same. We are all unique. So your character should be unique in how they speak and what they believe in. Each character, your main character and your side characters, should have their own goals. So your main character, that's going to be the focus. So they should have the main plot goal. If we're going back to mystery, their goal is to find out, how to solve this mystery. They're going to do the investigation. And then maybe their sidekick's goal is to help them figure out something that they're missing in their life. With that, you also have the motivations, the why. Motivations are just why. Why do they have that goal? Why do they want to complete that goal? Character development is a big one. So we're still looking at the character arc. Want to figure out if your main character experiences internal and external stakes. Internal stakes is what the character is pursuing and why. and what will happen if they fail or if they achieve their goal. And that should be something that's very consistent throughout the whole manuscript. The reader needs to know it. And that's another thing that authors kind of get hung up on is everything's in your mind, right? Like you know these characters like the back of your hand. You know the plot. You know everything. And sometimes the reader does need to know that, and sometimes they don't. And it's a very tricky balance to figure out when the reader needs to know something and when it's okay that it's just something in your mind. But hopefully this is helping a little bit. So the external stakes are how will the character's life change if they fail or succeed? And who else will be affected by their success or failure? And these two things are things that are great to put into the narrative when you're in scenes, you know, what the character is thinking about. Excuse me, what the character is thinking about is the narrative. The secondary characters, all the main character sidekicks, should enhance the story, not distract from the main character. Now, that's not to say that you can't have really cool sidekicks. You should definitely have really cool sidekicks. But the focus should be on the main character's story arc and the main character's development. It's great to see the secondary characters develop as well, but the reader usually isn't in their mind. The reader is usually in the main character's mind. And when I say main character, I am referring to even if you have multiple POVs, it can be multiple main characters. Then you also want to make sure within that the relationships between the characters are believable. Is this a realistic thing that's happening? Do they have chemistry? Do they have tension? That would probably be more relevant if it's a romance. Is it believable that they would end up together? Is it believable that these people would be friends? Is it believable that they would be doing these things together when you compare it to like the type of jobs that they have or the values that they have, and then ultimately their goals and motivation? Does it make sense for their goals and motivation that these two characters would be in this scene together? So that's character development. The next one is plot. And these are the questions that you should ask yourself when you're reading about your concept. So what is the main plot? There's main plots and there's subplots, and the main plot is the one that goes all the way through the story. It's the inciting incident to the resolution. In that, you also want to think about your themes. What are the genre tropes that you're going to come across? What are the themes that you want your reader to take away from this? You know, is it a love theme? Is it I guess romance is the easiest one for tropes, but you know, is it enemies to lovers? Is it grumpy sunshine? Is it one bed? Those types of things. What are the tropes that you need to nail in this plot? And then also the main themes of the plot. And that kind of goes back to character development as well, because a lot of themes come through the characters. Then you want to ask yourself as you're reading, what are the subplots? Subplots are like the incidences that happen as the character is going through this journey of the main plot. Ask yourself if the conflicts happen naturally or if they feel a little forced. That can be kind of difficult to tell because you are so close to the story. So for that, I'll just say do your best and think about if it seems like a realistic situation. Another side note to that is critique partners and beta readers are gold, so definitely use them. Finally, is the plot twist realistic? And that really only depends on if you have a plot twist. Not every book is going to have a plot twist, but you want to make sure that it is realistic and believable. The next bigger section is scene development. And the whole purpose of scenes in your story is to elicit anticipation. So we want to figure out when you're reading your scene, each scene, not just like, oh, I'm reading the whole book and I'm going through the plot. I mean, like really look at each scene. This is scene 1, this is scene 2, and not just the chapter. Not this is chapter 1, because sometimes you can have those scene breaks. Look at the scene as its own story within the story. So does the scene have an incident? Is there something that moves the plot or the character arc forward? That can be big or it can be really small. Does the scene have a purpose? How or why does the scene matter to the overall story? So when you read a scene, take a minute and think, did this matter to my main plot? Did this matter to my themes? Did this matter to my character arc? And then does each scene have a clear beginning, a clear middle, and a clear end? There should be something at the beginning that captures the reader's attention that's like, ooh, yes, I want to continue reading this. What's going to happen in this scene? The middle is where everything happens. And then the end, I think I'm jumping a little ahead of myself, but the end should have a cliffhanger. Yep, I did jump ahead. So like I was saying, does the scene open with something that changes for the character? It could be something small that gets in their way and helps them on their journey, or it could be something big. Does the character react to that change? And I should have put, how does the character react to that change? Because that's going to give your character agency. And agency becomes really apparent for the character development within each scene. Finally, does the scene end on a cliffhanger? You want to end on a cliffhanger. It doesn't always have to be super suspenseful, but it just needs to be something that will encourage the reader to keep reading the story. You don't want to give them any opportunity to look at their clock and be like, wow, it is 2 a.m. and I really need to put a bookmark in there. I hope that this scene ends soon. You want them to stay up and continue reading your book. The next one we're going to discuss is pacing. It can kind of go hand in hand with plot, but these are the questions you should be asking yourself about the pacing. Is it going too fast or too slow? And then you want to mark down, where does the story rush and where does the story drag? So where it rushes, what you're kind of looking for is, did this happen too fast? Why did this happen so fast? Was it intentional that it happened fast? Whatever the subject is. Let's take like a fight, an action scene, like a fight in a fantasy or something. You typically want those to go fast because the reader's going to be reading them fast. They're going to, whoa, what's going to happen next? Is he going to get hurt by the sword, or, what's going to happen? But if you're really wanting to build tension, then you want the story to slow down a little bit. You want to explain what's going on in the main character's mind, in their narrative. The point of these two is to make sure that it is very intentional, that if it's rushing, it's intentional that it's rushing. And if it's dragging a little bit, it's intentional that it's dragging. And those are totally valid options. That doesn't mean that your pacing is off. The pacing is off when it seems like it's not intentional, when there doesn't seem to be a reason that it should be rushing or a reason that it should be dragging. And then also, you need to remember to compliment yourself. So you want to make sure that you're marking the spots that you're going at an appropriate pace. Like if you're reading a scene and you're just like, oh, the scene is so good. Like I am hitting everything. I've got an awesome beginning. I've got the middle part here. It all makes sense. And then I've got a cool cliffhanger ending. Mark that scene, mark the pacing, mark everything in that scene. Like, you did so good here. Do this everywhere. And then finally for pacing, where can you cut information dumps and long backstory explanations? Usually, you want to be looking for long paragraphs or long pages of those information dumps or backstories. And it doesn't mean that you have to completely cut them out of the story. I'm not saying, just go in there and press the backspace. What I would recommend doing is taking those sentences, breaking them down, and placing them in other sections, like maybe dialogue, where it would be relevant to include that information in the narrative. Next section we're discussing is world building. For world building, you want to create logical details for your story. This will be different for every story, but every story does have world building. So even if you're doing a contemporary romance, you still need to build the world. And by that, I mean you need to build the main character's world. How did they perceive the world? What is coming up for them in their world? And also you still need to make it clear that they're living in, 2023 Earth. For sci-fi, it's going to be a whole lot different. But the general idea is you want to make sure that the setting of your story is clear throughout the story, not just the beginning of the story. Same for the backstory. Is it integrated appropriately? Are there clear definitions of the systems and rules? Going back to my example for the romance, for the specific character, this could be family systems and family rules, or rules that they've created for themselves, like they must always go to bed at 10 p.m., things like that. For sci-fi, it would probably be on a much larger scale than that, but that's an example of how it's on a smaller scale. And then also, how does society work in your world? Is it the same as our society? Is it a different society? All of that should be clear to the reader. Are the descriptions of your world vivid? And most of that is very difficult to get without also giving information dumps. But it is possible. So what I would recommend is highlighting the areas that the descriptions are vivid. You're like, yes, this is a fantastic description of the weather outside. And then asking yourself if that's the right place to be putting that description. Is there a clear sense of place and time? This would be relevant for each scene. Where is the character? What time? Is it daytime, nighttime? What's going on with the character? Are they at work? Are they at home? Are they, shopping at the market? Make sure that the details of the external world enhance the story. That's kind of what I was saying about the descriptions. You don't want to just put, a page of like, this is where the character is. Well, depending on the genre, but in most stories, it should be integrated in a way that is not distracting. It shouldn't be distracting and the reader's just like, now where was the dresser? I don't know. It should enhance the story. And then you want to mark down what details distract from the main plot or the character arc, which is pretty much what I was just saying. We're on our last section for the edit letter, which is the ending. The ending is the promise, the thing that you promise the reader. Does the main plot have a resolution? What did you promise the reader when you started this story? Or if you don't want to think about the reader, what did your main character promise would happen by the end of this story? And did that happen? For example, was the mystery solved? Is the romance a happily ever after or happy for now? Did the main character succeed or fail? All of that needs to be very clear by the end of the story. Make sure you mark down what emotion you want to elicit from the reader by the end of the story. Should the reader feel sad when they're done reading your book? Should they feel satisfied? Like, oh, that was a journey and that was a very good ending. Those are my favorite. Should they be angry? Like, I know there are some books out there where like you get to the last page and you're like, I'm done with that book. No, never again. Do you want them to be content? Just they're able to go along with the rest of their day and that was just such a wonderful, fulfilling story. What emotion do you want the reader to feel when they get to the end? And does the ending deliver what was promised in the beginning? What were the main character's goals? Did they fulfill those goals? Did they fail or succeed? I kind of went backwards there, but hopefully you got the point. That was it for all the sections. So now we're going to talk just a tiny bit about how to organize this. So how do you process and organize all these sections, all these notes? How do you even begin doing this? My recommendation is don't start revising. Create a separate document as you're going through these things. The reason I suggest this is because authors want to fix it as soon as they read it. And I recommend that you have your manuscript here, and if you have a second monitor or however you read on your Kindle or have your computer here, just a way to have two notes. So you're reading, you create a separate document that when you get to something that you're like, yes, I need to fix this, if you have an idea in your mind of how to fix that, mark down, label the page number, label the chapter and scene, and then write it out separately. Don't fix it now. Write it out separately and then put it away and continue with what you were doing. You have two ways that you can do this. Option one is you read the story once and you make notes for each section, creating your own edit letter as you go, and you can color code or label things as needed. That's the way that I do it. That's how I complete a developmental edit. But as a self-editor, you would have a lot more time with the manuscript. So you would be able to do multiple rounds, which means that you could do option two, which is you read the story once for each section. So each section, you're reading the whole story, but only focusing on world building. And then maybe the next time you read the whole story and you're only focusing on the character art, things like that. And then another, I guess it would be like option 2.1 would be you could combine sections. So you could put the beginning and the ending together. You're focusing on the beginning and then you're focusing on the ending. And then you could put pacing and plot together. I'm going to look at my whole main plot, subplots, and the pacing in this one pass, and then I'll do one for character arc, and then I'll do one for world building. So that's another option for you. A final note, a reminder, it is very important that you love your work just as much as you critique your work, love your work. There's a reason that you wanted to create this story, and this whole process is about learning. It's not about pointing out all the things that you do wrong. It is about learning what you do right, and it's about learning how you can do it even better. And when you complete this process, you'll make your next story even better because you'll have in your mind the things that you need to focus on. Like, oh, last time I was not so great with the world building. So I'll make sure my world building is, really detailed when I'm drafting this time. Don't only look for the flaws. Please don't just look for the flaws. Look for the ways that you do a really good job. Leave yourself hearts, leave yourself emojis. Be proud of your work and remind yourself what you did well so that you can keep doing it. I have some resources for you. I will share them in the Discord channel, but just a quick rundown. I've got some self-editing tips and tricks on my blog. If you're thinking about getting a developmental edit, I've got that on my blog, and so does Jane. She has when and whether to hire a developmental editor, and it is very comprehensive and something that I highly recommend looking into before you hire an editor, if you want to go that route. A lot of people have questions about word count, so I included the word count from Writer's Digest, and then thesaurus description database. It's one stop writers, I think, but it has so many resources that you can use. And then also helping writers become authors is another great resource. And one final thing is thank you so much for your time. I'm creating something that I'm hoping will help authors, and it's a workbook called Self-Edit Like a Developmental Editor. So it's going to have a bunch of templates that you can use to guide you through everything that we discussed here. I don't have a release date for it yet. I've been working on it all year, and it's pretty much a passion project at this point, so I can only work on it in little bits and pieces. But if you subscribe to my newsletter, they are going to be the first ones to get updates about it and information on what it'll include and maybe some sneak peeks. But I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping that it'll launch sometime this year, but that depends on if I can get it done. So with that, I would like to leave plenty of room for questions because I'm sure there will be a lot. I hope there will be a lot. And you can go ahead and pop those through and I will answer them. I'm going to be around pretty much for the whole conference, so I'll always be checking in. But again, thank you so much for your time today. And that's the end of the presentation.